Hi everybody, Dusty here again. This is another, I know last time I probably mentioned that these were going to be a weekly video series. I haven't quite kept up with that. I apologize. I hope you weren't waiting with bated breath for the next one to come out. I kind of get the feeling that you weren't, because I've only had a few views on these, which is fine. I think as the as my readership grows, more and more people will come and see these, after the fact. But I know that right now there aren't a lot of you that are watching them each time they come out. So, but that's cool. We'll we'll build up a little library of these videos, and we'll have them for posterity. But it probably, as it happens, it probably won't be a weekly thing. That's a little ambitious. I've found out sometimes I got other things going on. I don't quite have the time to do one of these, but I'll try to do them as often as possible, at least once a month. Hopefully a couple times a month. This time we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about my book specifically. We've done that in the last 3 of these videos. I've gotten quite a few questions via email from a lot of my readers about different things about my books, just in general, the style, the writing, and all that. So what I want to do is this segment, I'm going to call it The Authors That Shaped Me. Basically, the authors that I've read, over my lifetime, who I've picked things up from, who I've learned from, and, in a way, who I try to emulate, because, you do what you like, right? So, there's a handful of them. I think I've got a list of the 4 big ones, and then there's a few honorable mentions. I'd like to go through them, but so we'll get right into that. But before we do, again, we do have a tradition now. This one we didn't keep up with the once per week thing, but we are going to keep up with the having a beer while we enjoy it, right? So let's get right to that. If you guys want to open one up, you can too. This time I have from the brewery. Let me get that in there. From the brewery. This is a triple Tonneleri. Sorry, I'm not. It's in French, I guess. But it's a Belgian-style ale fermented in oak barrels. Should be a little bit lighter than the one I had last time. It weighs in at 9.5% alcohol. So let's get this one cracked open. By the way, this is my Whale Slayer. I had a couple of guys email me about this one from my last video about it. Yeah, it looks like something that Austen Conrad could jug somebody with, but it's really just a badass bottle opener. A friend that is a blacksmith out in Mississippi makes those. A guy by the name of James Clark. You can look him up. He has a Facebook group called Whale Slayers, and these are highly sought after. He makes a bunch of different styles. This is one of the more basic styles. I have I think 4 different ones from him. Awesome blacksmithing. Really cool stuff. I don't know, when you're a beer nerd, you gotta have appropriate glassware and appropriate openers. So anyways, from the brewery, triple Tonneleri Belgian ale aged in oak barrels. So let me get it up there so you can see it. Oh, it's a nice one. Pours a really nice golden color. Looks a little gassy, nice and fruity. That Belgian yeast gives off a lot of fruit notes. It's good. I'm usually not a big fan of Belgian beers. There's the funkiness and the yeast notes. I've never really been a huge fan of in the Belgian beers, but I drink them on occasion. I'm going to trying to find out this one, what year it is. It's 2014. So this one has been in my cellar for 4 years, maybe more. And it's held up well. It's a really, really nice beer. Only 9.5%. I might be able to finish that bottle on my own. We'll see. Before I get started, also, I'll show you guys. I actually have a microphone this time. So hopefully hopefully the audio is a lot better. I realized on the last one I shot that I had already bought this one, but I didn't have it hooked up right, and the crappy audio was still going through the webcam mic, which, I don't know. I went back and looked at a couple of those videos, and the audio was horrible, so I apologize to you guys for that. So let's jump right into this. The authors that shaped me. And I've got 4 or 5 of them. And then I have a couple honorable mentions after that. Now, this isn't a popularity list. It's not the authors that, that I love to read the most, or the ones that I think are the best. Some of them I do, and, some of them I do read the most. But these are the ones who have influenced my own writing. There's a lot of great writers out there who I love to read, but I can't really put a finger on anything of what they do that I try to emulate. But these are some that have been really influential in my own writing. And now, as I near completion of my 3rd book, actually my 4th, if you're on my email list, you've gotten a short story that has nothing to do with Austen Conrad. So I'm on the home stretch of my 4th book now, and I'm starting to kind of realize I do have a little bit of a voice that's starting to form. I mean, I know it usually, most authors, it takes a while to kind of get into a groove, and I think that's been the case with me too. But I do think that I'm kind of coalescing my style a little bit. And anyways, I'll go through these. Number one is Stephen King, and it's almost a cliche to name Stephen King for an author to cite him as one of their influences, and for better or for worse, I'm saying me too, right? Because everybody would like to emulate Stephen King. Obviously, he's wildly successful, probably the most successful, popular novelist of our time. But there are specific things that I learned from him over the years, long before I ever thought of writing books myself. And I've been reading Stephen King since I was, really before I was too young to even read his stuff. I can remember, I can't remember how old I was. I was probably maybe 8 or 9 years old. The first time I read one of his books, and I think I would have been 10 actually, because the first one I read of his was Salem's Lot, and we, growing up, we didn't go to the movies much, but we watched, the TV movies that would come out, and I remember that the TV network movie for Salem's Lot came out, and my whole family was glued to it. My brothers and sister and parents. I didn't know who this guy was, but hey, vampires, right? So we watched the thing, and it just scared the living shit out of us. Well, out of me, and I'm sure my brothers and sister who were also young. But I remember thinking, holy shit, that is cool. I mean, what had been my entertainment up to that point? Had been, mostly stuff that's geared for kids, right? The occasional stuff that you watch just because that's what your parents are watching. But that was the first time I can remember thinking, God damn, I want more of that, right? So I learned that movie was made from a book, and I went to the library. We lived in a tiny town up in Northern California, and there was this branch of the county library there, and it was a little bitty one-room library with a librarian. And I went to her and I said, "Hey, I want to borrow this book, this Salem's Lot," and she she was surprised. She said, "Why do you want to read that? That's not appropriate. That's not it's not right for your age group, and that'll give you nightmares." I remember she told me that, and I told her, "Well, I've already seen the show, and I want to read it." So, anyways, she made me bring a note from home from my parents, so that in order for her to let me check the book out, and I did, and I brought it home, and it was a big book for me at the time. I was reading beyond my age, but I remember reading it and I go, "Holy shit, this is awesome stuff." I mean, up till then it was what, children's books, and then teenager type stuff. Like I had been reading a lot of Hardy Boys, that kind of stuff, Nancy Drew, The Three Investigators, which I loved all that stuff. I still do, but Salem's Lot, it just floored me, and I became an instant fan, and I've read I've read all of his books ever since. And I think there's one coming out right now I haven't read obviously yet, and then the one before that I haven't read yet. But I try to read them all as they come out, because even though they're they vary by style, but they're always pretty fucking good. I mean, I don't know. And he's not just a genre writer. A lot of people think that he's just a horror writer. Your average person on the street, they're sometimes surprised to learn that he wrote the book that Stand By Me was based on, Shawshank Redemption, The Green Mile, a bunch of these great stories that aren't necessarily monster stories, but he's just a great storyteller. So what did I pick up from him? The biggest thing that I learned from reading Stephen King all my life was to be descriptive, to show rather than tell. He has an ability to put you in the story where you're living it, and it's details like the character didn't just pull out a cigarette and smoke it. He tells you about the crinkling of the pack as he's pulling a camel, and it just he just puts you in, paints the picture for you. And a lot of authors do that, but for me he was the first one that I really thought, holy shit, this is in Technicolor. This guy is really putting me in the story. And I've enjoyed that my entire life almost with his books. And, and I never thought seriously about writing books until recently, but I've always kind of thought, hey, I could do that. I could write books. And that part of what Stephen King does has always been one of the things that I've thought, well, hell, if I ever write books, I want to make sure that I'm descriptive, colorful, and really put the reader in the situation. Show, not tell. And I'm pleased to report that a lot of the feedback I've gotten from you guys is that I have been at least partially successful at that. I've gotten a lot of great feedback from people saying that, yeah, I was right there with Austen. You were able to, paint that picture and set it up perfectly. So anyways, that's what I got mostly from Stephen King. He wrote a book years ago called On Writing, which is, a nonfiction book about, his advice for other aspiring writers. And I read it actually back then just because I was reading everything he came out with. I need to go back and read it now that I am actually writing. But I know there's a lot of gems in there because every author I see who writes about the craft of writing, they all cite some passage or some nugget from Stephen King's book On Writing. I actually still have it. I have the hardback in my bookcase, so I need to reread that. Thank you, Stephen King. He's been such a huge part of my life. Number 2, this one's probably a little less apparent to some of you, but number 2 on this list of the authors that shaped me is Steve Berry. Now he's a he's a New York Times bestseller. He's one of the bigwigs of archaeological thriller, historical based thrillers, that kind of thing. Those of you that don't read those types of books, I'm sure you're familiar with the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. And, he's in that same sort of genre. Now, I started reading him before the Da Vinci Code came out, and his first book was The Amber Room, and that was the first book that I read by him. And if you're into history, the thing I love about Steve Berry is I love history, and that style of book, that genre, and there's a few indies that do a great job of this too, but there's a few of the big guys are Steve Berry, James Rollins, Clive Cussler does a good job of this, obviously Dan Brown, and countless others, because the genre has gotten so huge, but these guys that weave real history into a present day thriller, I don't know. I love that because you learn. I mean, I love thrillers, right? I love, suspense and action and, car chases and gunfights and all that stuff. But I also love history, and it's cool that you get both of those in one book. And and Steve Berry, I read The Amber Room in probably 06 or so. I got in my notes here that he published it in 03. And I wasn't on the bandwagon right at first, but not too long after that, I discovered him, and I read that book, and it's a great book about the Amber Room that was in the in St. Petersburg, in the palace there that apparently the Nazis sacked. Basically, it's this room, big old room that's every inch of it is covered with carved ornately sculpted amber, worth millions and millions of dollars, right? Of course, the Nazis sacked everything during World War II, and that's one of the big mysteries, today is where is the Amber Room, right? Because a lot of those treasures have been that the Nazis stole away. A lot of them have been recovered, but unless something very recent that I missed happened, the Amber Room is still out there. And there's a lot of, every once in a while you see a news story about it, some cave or something. They think they may find it if they dig deep enough. But anyways, it's a fascinating story, and he wove that background into a modern day thriller, and it was awesome. And he's written, after I read that one, then I started reading all the rest of his books, and he's another one like Stephen King. I read every one of them as they come out now, and every one of his books, he takes some really interesting historical thing and weaves it into a modern day thriller. And the thing that Steve Berry was, he was the first time I had just started using ebooks. I didn't even have a Kindle, but I was reading on my phone, and this wasn't with the Amber Room. This was later, because I think that one was paperback. But later, when I started reading on the phone and using ebooks, I would start getting to where I would have, I would read the book on my phone, and I would have my iPad open with Google, right? And like with Steve Berry, he'd have a story. I'll be reading about something that's going on in the Vatican, right? In some big famous chapel or something with these pictures on the walls, and there's clues and stuff, and maybe his Cotton Malone, his guy, maybe he's hiding behind some statue or something, and he describes it. Well, the cool thing is you can go on to Google and look at it, right? So you can see pictures of it. You can go onto Google Earth and check out the terrain these guys are writing about. And I just think that's really cool, because that's another way to immerse yourself in a story. And he does a really good job of using these actual places, real history, and you learn a lot. I mean, it's like you go on a vacation when you read one of his books, and that's another thing that I think it's influenced my own writing, and I've heard from readers that like with No Time to Bleed out in Amboy, I've heard from several readers that have gone on Google and checked the place out after they read the book. If they're not from Southern California and they're not familiar with it. And some of the other locations I've used, and I love to hear that people are doing that, because that's one of the things that helps me expand my enjoyment of a book also. If I can, go beyond what's on the page and actually learn more about those places and artifacts and people and the history. So the biggest thing, though, about Steve Berry, even though I love his books, and there's parts of his things about his writing that I've tried to emulate, probably the most important thing about him with regards to my own writing is that I credit Steve Berry with being the inspiration for me to go ahead and start writing when I did. Now, I got started late. I'm not going to rehash my history again, but those of you that are on my email list and whatnot, that I've been a writer of other things, technical writing and all that stuff for years. And I've always loved to read, and I've always thought it would be cool to write fiction books. But the older you get, the more it seems like shit, It's it's there's no sense starting now. It's too late, right? Well, I didn't even realize this until a few years ago, that Steve Berry was 48 when he published The Amber Room. And when I read that, at the time, I was thinking about starting to write myself. I started seriously thinking about it for about a year or two, probably about 2 years before I actually started doing it. But when I read that he was 48, that a light bulb went off in my head. And at the time, I was 47. So I thought, well, shit, if he did it, maybe I can do it. He, there's not a lot of parallels between my life and his. He's been a successful lawyer, and I'm sure that he he probably had the wherewithal to just quit doing whatever he was doing and go full time into writing. I don't know. I didn't read that much into his history, but no, he started. I mean, he probably started before he was 48, but he published that book at 48. So, what I said to myself when I learned that, I said, okay, well, I'm going to give this a shot, and my goal is to publish my book while I'm 48. Well, I just had my birthday last month in August, and I turned 49. So during the prior year, this past August to the August before, I was able to publish 2 books. I published No Time to Bleed and Blood Brothers. Now they're both novellas, so maybe on a technicality, maybe that's not quite, maybe that doesn't count, but I'll take it as a win. I was kind of hoping I could get Blood Out finished while I was still 48 also, but I couldn't quite do it, but I'm not upset about that. I think I hit my goal on getting published while I was still 48. And so because of that, that's why I give Steve Berry the credit for inspiring me, kick myself in the butt when I did to, quit thinking about it, quit thinking, oh, this would be cool. Just fucking do it, right? Just, butt in the chair, fingers on the keyboard, get it done. So he's number 2 on the list. Number 3, Lee Child. Now, I've had quite a few people that have compared my books to compared Austen Conrad, my character, to Jack Reacher, Lee Child's character, and that's that's not entirely a surprise to me, because I took a lot of what I learned from Lee Child when I was crafting the character of Austen Conrad. Now, in a previous video, when I did the video on the background video for Blood Brothers, I talked about Austen Conrad's character and where he'd come from and how the roundabout way of how those books came about and whatnot. But as I was as I was writing them, and I decided that he would be, he'd probably make a good series character. You're damn right. It was Lee Child and the Jack Reacher books that I was thinking of. I mean, gosh, he's got this, wildly successful series based on a lone wolf guy who, there's not much plot continuation from book to book. They're like episodes, but he always lands in an area. He's a drifter, right? He doesn't have a lot of strings. You don't have to keep a lot of different characters in line, and basically is a lone wolf. And yes, a lot about Austen Conrad is based on things I liked about Jack Reacher. Now, he's not completely. I mean, there's a lot of differences. He's a lot more rough around the edges, I think. And my writing, I think it's good, but I'm not going to compare my writing to Lee Child, not for many years. But the first Lee Child book I read was Gone Tomorrow, and I read it in about 2010. Now, he'd been writing these books for a long time, and so I was kind of late on the bandwagon for that. Gone Tomorrow is the 13th book, and he releases one a year, so I was about 13 years late getting on that bandwagon. But I remember I bought the paperback in the drugstore, and I was reading it, and I was just floored by the descriptiveness of the action. And I earlier talked about Stephen King, how he could describe scenes and set you up. Well, Lee Child is like that for action, describing especially fistfights and hand-to-hand combat. It's not just the guy walked up, punched him in the face, and it was over. No, he goes into the physics and the mechanics and whatnot of it. And I remember the first time, and the psychology too. He's this Jack Reacher character. In the split second before he hits the guy, he's doing all these calculations of, oh yeah, it's there's 4 guys here, and that guy's gonna run when the shit starts going down, and that guy, I can get to him because he's got a gimp leg. I'll save him, and I'll hit this guy first, and and then he choreographs the fight. And I just, when I read that book, I go, holy shit, this makes these, it just really described and painted that that scene for me. It just really put you into it, and I don't know, maybe not everybody loves that shit, but I ate it up. I really ate it up, and and like the others, this was before I started thinking about writing myself, but I really liked that, and I thought that it just really gave a depth to the action story, let's face it, there's not a lot of depth of character in a Jack Reacher book. You're not really having these emotional dilemmas and all this stuff. It's basically just action and suspense, right? But he wrings more out of that action and suspense than just about any other writer that I've read. So I went back and started way back at the beginning. After I read Gone Tomorrow, I started back at the beginning, and I read all of them up to wherever I was, and then ever since then, I've read each of them as they come out, and he releases one a year. And that's the number one lesson I learned from him, was that detailing and choreographing of these action scenes. And I think that that maybe not so much in Blood Brothers, but in No Time to Bleed, I think you can see some of that influence in that book, and I have heard in the feedback that's the case, and that's what I tried to emulate more so than the actual character of Austen. Emulating Jack Reacher. I was trying, yes, there are some parallels there, but I was more so, what I wanted from Lee Child is I really wanted to be able to strive for that level of being able to write an action scene. And he's the master. I'm not going to say that I reached that height, but it's a lofty goal, and and I'll continue to strive for it. So, Jack Reacher, Lee Child. Now, the cool thing, one of the things, he was one of the first series writers I started reading that was whose character was a lone wolf guy, right? A lone wolf, basically invincible, beats the fuck up out of everybody type of guy. And of course, he only puts out one book a year. So in between, you go around looking for more, right? And I found a few others that were like that. Barry Eisler, he's one of my favorites. I don't really put him on the list of influence on this list I'm going through, but his Jack Rain character is another great one I love. But once I had started reading a few of those books. We're all on Facebook, right? So the number 4 guy on my list, the way I found him is in my Facebook news feed. There was an ad, right? And Facebook is great. Us authors know that. It's great for targeting ads to people that, are maybe likely to like your stuff. So there was an ad for a Mark Dawson book. And, and it was, I remember it had something to do with, if you like Jack Reacher, you'll love John Milton, right? And I was, hell yeah, man, that's red meat for me, right? And get a free book. So, so I clicked on it and I downloaded the free books, and that put me on Mark Dawson's email list. And the free book was 1,000 Yards, and it's it's a prequel book for his John Milton series. And I read it and I loved it. And by the way, he's an indie author, and some of you, if you haven't heard from him and you like thrillers and action books, definitely give him a look. But I, just like with Lee Child and all the others, I when I like an author, I go back and I read everything they've written, right? And of course I got on the bandwagon for Mark Dawson fairly early. I think he had 1 or 2 of his books out yet, but I read the free one first, and then I started reading the others, and I've read all the rest of them as they've come out. Now, he's another guy, a lone wolf character, is John Milton guy. He's an ex British government assassin, and another badass, right? One of these days we need a battle royale, right? John Rain, John Milton, Jack Reacher, put them all in a room, see who comes out, right? But anyways, so I start reading all these Mark Dawson books, and of course, that goes into, his book. He went, for me, even though he's an indie author, and you don't see him on the shelves in the Barnes and Noble stores, the brick and mortar stores. I got where, I would look forward to his books as much as, the next Jack Reacher book. And I love that they came more often. I mean, he wasn't only doing one a year. So, but what did the number one lesson I got from Mark Dawson, and what he, probably the influence he has on my books, maybe not so much the writing, but the fact that you have actually read the book at all. For many of you, I attribute to Mark Dawson. When I started writing I had started writing before I was reading Mark Dawson, right? And then I didn't even realize he was an indie author at the time, but when I started writing my own books, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about publishing. And then, I was, just through various Google searches and whatnot, I figured out a few things about how to publish, how to make the ebooks, how to get the first one onto Amazon. And I put No Time to Bleed up on Amazon with mostly, David Cochrane. He's another great guy. He probably should be on this list, but he has a book called what did he call it now? Digital. Let's Get Digital is what it was called, and gives you all the ins and outs about self-publishing books. And that one I stumbled on, and he gave me all the basics. So I should, David Cochrane, I should give him some credit. He should probably be on this list too. And I've read his books; they're great books, historical fiction, great books. But his nonfiction is what helped me learn sort of the basics of how to get an ebook published. Right? Well, I had this ebook there, and of course, you put it on Amazon, and 1 or 2 of your friends buy it, but nobody else even knows it's there. So I was doing some research on promoting and marketing books, and a few different places I kept seeing people mention Mark Dawson and about Mark Dawson recommends this and Mark Dawson does that, and I go, wait a second, that's the guy that's the guy whose thriller books I've been reading, so I better look into this, right? So I did, and it turns out he's got he writes thrillers, and then he also has a business where it's called the Self-Publishing Formula, where he teaches and has classes and podcasts and all these things about how to promote. Not so much about how to make a book, but how to promote it, how to get visibility, how to get it in front of people. And I jumped into that feet first. And I started watching all the podcasts, and I took the courses, and those of you who are on my email list and you found me through that and through the free books I've offered on BookFunnel and whatnot, that's everything I learned in Mark Dawson's course. So I continue to learn more stuff from him. So I don't want to make this a commercial for him. So, but he has influenced my books in such a way that he's on this list. So, he's number 4. Now, I think those are the 4 that I kind of think have had the most influence on my books themselves. The things, when you see the book, when you read it, when you look at it, those are the guys who, through my lifetime of reading books and whatnot, who I've learned lessons from and emulated the most. Now, I do have a few honorable mentions. Number 1, I gotta throw it out for John Steinbeck. Most people, well, at least here in California, most high school kids, they read a couple of John Steinbeck stories. But, that guy, he was one of the masters. And what I think, you could write whole volumes about his craft. But what really kind of influenced me about John Steinbeck is just his love for California, and that's where I'm from, right? I'm a Californian and born and raised here. For all of its problems these days, and I don't want to get into politics or anything, but there's it's crazy what's going on politically in this state, but it's my home and I love it, and I grew up here, and John Steinbeck, he was one of the top chroniclers of the human condition in California during some very formidable times of this state, of our state's history. So, and I think that that does shine through a little bit in my books too. I won't deny it. I wasn't consciously trying to. And I'm not I'm not going to be as pretentious as to compare myself to John Steinbeck, but he has influenced me some. Another one is James Michener. Those of you who like historical fiction, I'm sure you know who he is. Huge, thick, ponderous tomes of historical fiction. It gives you all kinds of background to whatever area he's writing about. His book on Texas is awesome. His book on Chesapeake, Alaska, Hawaii, each of those, it's like, gosh, he really gives you a feel for, the history and the fabric of the people of any of those areas. And I love that. I don't claim to be trying to emulate him in any way, but he's been an influence. Another one is, and this one has probably influenced me more as a person, for my whole life than specifically as an author. But Jean Craig Head George, she wrote a number of books way back in the 50s and 60s and whatnot. But the one that sticks with me is called My Side of the Mountain. And I know a couple of my brothers, both of my brothers, I'm pretty sure they read it. And I read it too when I was a kid. It kind of, bounced around the house. And it was written in 1959. And I read it probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old. It was maybe 5 or so. It was a kid's book, but it was more kind of young adult, before Twilight and vampires and stuff. But it was young adult for the time. But it's a story about this kid that lives in New York, and he runs away from home to live out in the woods. And that one book, she's on this list for that one book because it really, at a very young age, it really kind of instilled an appreciation in me for, rugged individualism, self-sufficiency, taking care of your own, rather than, waiting for somebody else to come and take care of you. So, and a love for the outdoors, a lot of cool stuff. If you've never read that book, you should give it a go. It's a pretty cool one. And I think that one actually does influence my writing a little bit. Austen Conrad, he's not somebody to just call the cops to take care of shit. He's self-sufficient, and he takes care of things on his own. I'm gonna have one. I got one last one before I let you guys go. There's a author named Johnny Shaw, and he is, he's not a New York Times bestseller, but I discovered his books a couple of years ago, and he's got the series of books, Plaster City, Imperial Valley. There's one called Big Maria, and what I love about these books is that they are set they're set out in the desert here in California, out in, past Palm Springs. People think the desert, California, Palm Springs, that's glamorous. No. These are set in the seedy underbelly of the desert areas of California. But the characters are so real. The settings are so real and just funny as hell. And they're kind of, I guess they're sort of drama / thriller / humor, but I don't know, it's kind of hard to pigeonhole them, but he does such a great job. And what I really loved about when I read those books, everybody else on my list, with the exception of Steinbeck, but everybody else on my list, right? They write these stories that are set everywhere else in the country. Of course, Stephen King, we all know about everything that happened in Maine, right? Of course, his books are all set there. And I know there are a few authors that set their stories here in California. Joseph Wambaugh is probably the contemporary, the most famous one, but there's a few. But John Conley. But that's L.A. And I don't live in L.A. I live in the seedy underbelly of Southern California, and I love that Johnny Shaw has highlighted those areas, because there's just as much, even in the desert, there's just as much intrigue, just as much life, just as many stories to talk about. It doesn't have to be, among the high rises of LA or in New York or something. There are stories to tell right here in the backwaters of of inland Southern California. And so I credit Johnny with that, and also just an awesome writer. I mean, that guy, he can really spin a yarn, and he can. They say that good literature does two things: it instructs and delights, and his does both. I mean, entertaining as hell. So look him up if you get a chance. So I'm going to wrap it up. I don't even know how long I've been. Holy shit, 50 minutes. Those are the authors that have shaped me. Again, there's tons of them out there and tons that I like to read, but those are the ones that I can cite as having an influence on my own writing. So until next time, this is Dusty. I hope you're having fun doing whatever you're doing. Hope you'll tune in next time. And cheers. Bye now.